moving into the presentation, hopefully most people have heard about the action plan, are aware of what it's trying to achieve. But in summary, the high-level objective is to make sure that we as an organization are able to provide the right patient care to the right patient with the right resource at the right time. So there's a lot that goes into this. It sounds like it should be fairly straightforward, but we'll see as we go through this presentation that there's lots of different aspects to that we need to look at. So why are we looking at these things right now? BC, like a lot of places in the world, is undergoing quite a significant demographic change. We have an increasing population in BC. We now have 4.5 million people who live in this wonderful province, but that's been growing quite quickly. That grew 500,000 in the last 10 years, and the rate of growth is actually becoming faster and faster. So that's one thing that puts a strain on our ability to respond to the emergencies within that population. But perhaps more importantly, we are seeing now an aging demographic, and this is something that you guys are probably seeing with the calls that you're attending, the patients that you're working with. And, you know, in 2016, we actually saw for the first time in this province that we have more seniors than we have children. And that is really shifting the type of care and the type of response that is best for those types of patients. So an aging demographic does contribute to our overall call volumes. We know that a 75-year-old calls 911 3 times more than average, but a 90-year-old calls 12 times more than average. So that's something that we need to be able to respond to. And those increases in demand have been projected to have anything up to 6% year-on-year growth, which can be another 30,000 or so calls that we have to respond to across the province. So clearly, if we don't do anything to address that, then we're not going to be in a sustainable position. But for me, at least, the most important aspect to this is that we actually need to think about the type of care that we provide that different population. So the action plan really sets about 3 main strategies to try and address that. And the first thing is to recognize that not all patients, particularly the frail elderly, are best served by being taken to an emergency department, particularly if they have a lower acuity complaint, something that can be treated relatively easily. We've seen that in other countries around the world, they've been very effective at trying to connect these patients into more of an urgent primary care environment rather than to an emergency department in a hospital. So that's a mixture of getting better at providing patients advice and guidance over the phone, potentially being able to treat patients where they are so that they don't need to be transported somewhere else, or connecting them into new kinds of primary care services, such as the new urgent primary care center that's recently opened in Kamloops, which opens up some great opportunities for us. So the first thing that we want to do is to update our clinical response. Historically, we have always been sending an ambulance to patients, and that's something that is going to be evolving over time. That is really the foundation of our new clinical response model. It's not something that we're going to address in today's session, but hopefully that can kind of put into context how that is going to influence our responses. What we're focused on today is much more around the second point here, about trying to make sure that we have the right types of resources available at the right place at the right time. And we'll be talking a lot more around our provincial review of those resources. But the third, for me, equally important aspect to this is that we are working to create sustainable professional careers for paramedics in BC. So that's a combination of making sure that we can create regular positions wherever we can, that we have manageable workloads for paramedics, so that there's a reasonable utilization, that it's a sustainable career for people, and also that we can invest in the clinical skills, the training, the education of paramedics around the province to increase the level of care that we can provide our communities. So those three aspects pretty much come together into the action plan. When we look at that second point around resource reviews, as I said, I've been leading a provincial review, which is going around to each area of the province in turn to do some analysis and thinking around how we can do things as well as we can. This review has focused at this stage on BLS coverage. We know it's something that we need across the province, and we want to set a good, solid foundation for paramedic practice in this province. More advanced skill sets like ALS or critical care teams, community paramedics, paramedic specialists, the whole range of new resources that we're investigating and putting out there will come in future phases when we understand how those will layer on top and interact with our fundamental BLS responses. So this provincial review, we have now just come to the end of implementing the phase 1 communities. We had in there, we had 5 areas of the province that we had investigated. Central Vancouver, the area around Nanaimo, Dawson Creek and Fort St. John, Trail and Castlegar, and then Williams Lake and 100 Mile House. These were selected as our priority communities because we knew that we had issues that we wanted to address there, but also it gave us a really good understanding of what the issues are in communities of different types, different sizes, different geographies. So just last week, we finished implementing the final resources in Trail. So that phase of the project is now entering evaluation, where we're looking to make sure that the changes we've made have had the outcome, the impact that we were hoping to see from those new plans. What we're talking about today with Kamloops and Kelowna is the first announcements that have come out of phase 2 of this project. There is another stream of work going on in the Fraser Valley at the moment, working with Abbotsford, Chilliwack, Mission, and Agassiz. And so there will be more planning and analysis work going on there in due course. But we're focused today on the Kamloops and Kelowna areas. Now, these resource plans have been really focused on trying to understand the demand that we have for our services and how we get the right level of resources to meet that demand. We know that there is a lot more complexity to responding to calls about how we use resources in the moment, how we do cross-cover, how we position ourselves to be as effective as we can. And there is ongoing work in those areas that is building on top of these plans, again, just trying to make us as effective as we can be. So there's a lot of common themes that come through these resource plans, not least of which is the fact that it's been a long time since we did any kind of review like this. And so, you know, in these areas that we've been looking at, Kamloops and Kelowna, not surprisingly, we have found some mismatches between when we have demand and when we have historically had resources available, both in terms of where they are and at what times of day, days of the week, times of the year. So that mismatch has historically driven a lot of behaviors in our system. It has led to an imbalance of work between different shifts, which is, you know, not ideal. It's led to some very high utilization, some kind of killer shifts in some areas of the province, where we've got not a sustainable workload for the crews there. We've also had quite a common theme where we found areas that historically have been staffed using on-call shifts, but now have the demand, have the volume of work, that we should really be moving to a full-time staffing model using regular paramedic positions, regular shifts. And so there are changes along those lines. And then because we haven't always had resources in the right place, it leads to a lot of crews, a lot of ambulances being pulled out of their areas to either cover for a lack of resources. That may be to go and do transfer work. It may be on cross cover. It may simply just be responding to calls outside their own areas. And that leads to what we've kind of come to talk about, the vortex effect of smaller communities being stripped of their resources because we haven't adequately resourced neighboring communities. So these are all things that we have been looking to address through these resource plans in general. What we've needed to do there is to look at some of the data, do some analysis, but also pull together some of the operational leadership, their expertise, their understanding, their ability to help us plan how we can make things as effective as possible. So I'm going to pass over now to Mike just to talk us through our approach for developing these plans. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Nick. As with the other communities Nick has worked with, we established a working group in March 2018 made up of area managers, frontline supervisors, and CUPE Local 873 representatives. Our number one goal has been to improve patient care. We want to be sure that we are there for our patients at the right time with the right resource. We started our review by looking at the data, particularly with regard to BLS coverage. Our challenge was to look at the patterns of patient need, when and where they need us the most, and develop a plan to match our crews and resources to those needs. In developing our solution, we also looked at how it was best to balance the workload so that no one particular shift or particular crew was overwhelmed. We reviewed the workload by time of day and took that time of day with time of week and time on task and utilization rates. We also looked at the journey time home returning after long trips. We also looked at the patterns of interfacility transfers to see where this strains our emergency responses. This approach also allowed us to develop the plans that we're presenting today and will allow us to monitor how effective these plans are going forward. And of course, always on top of mind was the objective of moving these plans forward in a way that had the least amount of impact on our staff.
Thanks, Mike. So we had one working group looking at the Kelowna area and a separate working group looking at the Kamloops area. So guys, do you have any kind of observations from your experience of working with those teams?
Hi, I mean, working with the teams was great. We got to partner, of course, with our CUPE representatives who were at each of the meetings, and we elicited the feedback from the staff, who see this day in and day out. So I think, that along with the data we were able to pull and show to the groups, I think it was a very good process.
Yeah, definitely the collaboration with the union was excellent on this, and then even some of the frontline supervisors coming forth with ideas. I sort of had some ideas in the beginning that I'll say a lot of my staff providing some input really changed my vision and goal, and we were able to make some adaptations and change our process along the way, which was great.
Yeah. No, to me, it's really, really important because, we can look at some of the data and it tells us only so much, but actually understanding and interpreting that data and being able to look at the different options that we have available and discuss that as a group was really, really valuable for me. And, I think it's credit to you guys that you kept that open mind and we listened, and I really liked the fact that we actually went another stage out and engaged the actual stations themselves and had a number of station meetings where we could gather input and at least keep people aware of what we were thinking of. So that was excellent. Thank you. So before we dive into the details of each specific area, overall there were some common themes which are quite common across a lot of these reviews that we've been doing. But we were very pleased to be able to announce a couple of weeks ago that we're actually adding 43 new full-time paramedic positions across these two communities. And we actually managed to minimize the number of shift changes that we needed to make to meet those peaks in demand. There are a couple of those happening, but I think it was pretty clear from what we were seeing that we needed to do that to target those peaks and make sure that we're balancing the workload appropriately between crews. Big thing that came up for me was the impact of the high volume and the long distances of interfacility transfers in the interior. So I know we've got a little bit more to say about that, but that was definitely a lot of the time we spent as groups was thinking about how we could address that differently. So Brian, would you like to just give us a bit of a summary of the Kamloops plan?
Sure, yeah. Taking a look at Kamloops historically, we were drawing in resources from surrounding communities to come in, and they've been tasked with responding to calls, providing cross coverage for the city. At times they'll get hung up in the city after dropping their patient off at the hospital, and sometimes get tasked with long distance transfers going out of Royal Inland Hospital. And those transfers put tremendous pressure on Kamloops and its resources there. You know, for example, there's about 10 patients per week that get transferred from Royal Inland to Kelowna General alone, and the majority of those are for cath lab services. And with the increase in appointment of cardiologists at Royal Inland Hospital, those volumes are just being driven upwards. So we can take a look at the resource planning that's been put together with the hopes of reducing some of those pressures on the resources in Kamloops. So including the ALS Alpha car in Kamloops right now, we have a peak resourcing of 5 ambulances, and that includes the Juliet car, which was put into service about a year ago now. With this new deployment, we're going to see the addition of 2 ambulances, so of course putting our peak resourcing up to 7 ambulances. And those shifts are set to begin on January 17th of next year. In Chase, we've been able to add 3 new full-time positions, and that will see us running a full-time day Alpha car out of Chase. And that's set to begin on November 22nd. We're also adjusting the shift times of the Bravo car at Station 314, and that's going to help us better align our peak volume with the shift times from that car. We've discussed this a lot. We recognize the impact of creating regular positions over on-call work, and we'll discuss that a little more later on in this presentation.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. As Brian has mentioned, the impact of the transfer work was really significant in Kamloops, which is why we are kind of working in partnership with Interior Health to really review these transfers and how best we can respond to that requirement. So, as Brian says, we're going to have 7 ambulances in Kamloops now. One of those is going to be remaining as a Juliet to focus specifically on that patient population going to Kelowna General, and looking to make that trip once a day, and to avoid the situation that we've had historically, where the lack of resources in Kamloops has meant that first patient being transferred out for the day gets dropped in the cath lab, and the Kamloops crew is just heading back home to try and make sure that we maintain emergency coverage in Kamloops. With increased resources there, what we can now do is to have that transfer car that's heading to Kelowna stay in Kelowna through the day, help manage some of the demand in Kelowna while they're there, particularly for short local transfer work, but be the car available to take the patient back at the end of the day. And in that way, we avoid driving empty for 2.5 hours between the 2 communities, but hopefully safe in the knowledge that we're not sacrificing emergency coverage in Kamloops to be able to do that. So that, I think, was a really positive outcome from this. Mike, would you like to talk a little bit about the Kelowna?
Sure. Yeah, so similar to Kamloops, we've done some significant changes for Kelowna. Although the majority of the 911 calls occur in the central core of the Kelowna area, ambulances cover a larger geographical area, including Peachland to Lake Country. Crews from the smaller centers are routinely pulled into the Kelowna area, and like we talked about earlier with the vortex effect. This is often to meet the number of interfacility transfers that are leaving Kelowna General primarily towards the end of the day, the late afternoon. Currently, BCHS resources in the area are staffed through a mix of full-time and on-call paramedics, and there's often a workload imbalance across the crews, that are on a particular shift in there. So let's talk about the upcoming changes and how we're looking to address these changes. So including the ALS, Alpha, and Bravo units, Kelowna currently has a peak of 6 ambulances. This will be increased to a peak of 8 ambulances with these new positions. New positions will convert Kelowna into a full-time post. The additional positions in West Kelowna will allow us to operate a full-time Alpha car 24/7. With the additional positions in Lake Country, it'll allow us to operate a full-time Alpha straight day shift unit. And that'll be 7 days a week. With additional resources in Central Kelowna, units from West Kelowna and Peachland can focus on providing emergency coverage in their own communities. Changes effective November 22nd for West Kelowna and January 25th for Kelowna Post and Lake Country. Again, we recognize the impact created by establishing regular positions in place of our on-call staff, or sorry, on-call work, and I'll let Nick talk more to that.
So we found in both of these areas that we had basically the same kind of change that we had previously experienced for Nanaimo earlier in phase 1 of this project. Namely that historically that we had been too dependent on on-call shifts and that these areas merited becoming full-time posts. Now, at that time and since, we've had very productive discussions with our union representatives, both the representatives in our working groups and with the provincial executive, about looking at everything that we can do within our current collective agreement to mitigate the impact on on-call staff in these posts. So there are, for the Kamloops and Kelowna plans, 3 principal things that we are able to do, which largely mirror what we did in Nanaimo, with, I think, a fair level of success. The first thing to acknowledge is that the change to a full-time post means that the work for on-call staff, who will remain part of the post, will now shift to spare board work. We want to maximize the access that on-call staff have to that spare board work. So what we are doing is that we are limiting and staggering the introduction of irreg staff to the post to ensure that there is enough work for the on-call members who remain, and who and to make sure that we can continue to operate a full schedule. So in Nanaimo, we found that during the recruitment process itself, the 2 existing irregs actually took the full-time positions. So we started off with no irreg staff at all, and we managed to fill the shifts for the first couple of months just using on-call staff. But over time, it kind of leveled out a little bit, and we started introducing irreg staff, after 2, 3, 4 months, and I think they're now up to 4 irreg staff. And we've been able to find the right balance between the level of availability that on-call staff want to provide to work the spare board shifts, and having enough irreg staff that we can ensure that we maintain service with those vehicles. So we will be doing the same both in Kelowna and Kamloops, where the posts are becoming full-time. The other thing that we are able to do in recognition of that transition to spare board work is for those posts that are becoming full-time, we are going to be taking the 2 existing Fox shifts. In fact, it should hopefully have been started yesterday. But from October the 1st, the Fox shifts at 3:15 in Kamloops and at 3:41 in Kelowna, the 2 Fox shifts that exist in those posts, are now basically being put on full pay on the clock for the full 12 hours of their shifts. And there's been some communications to those staff around how they submit that through their shift activity form, and there'll be a little bit more of that later on here. The other thing that we are able to do, both in Kamloops and Kelowna, which we didn't have in Nanaimo, is that in both areas we are actually continuing with a Juliet car to help support some of the transfer work that occurs in those two areas. So there will be a small level of Encore shifts still available for the staff there. So we're getting towards the end of our presentation, so I do want to encourage those of you who are on here to ask some questions. That's why we're here, is to take some of those questions and provide some answers. So please go up into that panel that's on your control panel, open it up, get to those questions box, and put whatever it is into there. We will take any, basically any question on this subject. So don't worry that it may have been asked before, or even if it's something that we've covered. If you want to just us to go over it again, please do that, and let's have some questions coming through. Okay, so in terms of what's been happening since the announcement, a couple of weeks ago we made the announcement over 2 days to coordinate with the Ministry of Health, making media news releases associated with these changes. At that time, we sent out individual notifications and communications to all the staff in the impacted stations to either let them know around their shift schedule change for a few of them, but in most cases it was to be able to say that there was no change to their shift schedule, or it was a communication to all the irregs and on-call staff to let them know around the change and what the impacts would be for them. As you're aware, following that we had an all-staff memo that went out. And since then, we've been working on a series of information sessions just to help get the message out and provide an opportunity for questions. So both Brian and Mike have been holding some station meetings in their areas so that staff in those areas can come and talk face-to-face and understand what's going on. And I think those have been pretty good at getting people to come in and kind of understand what's going on. And we ran one of these information sessions last Friday, and this one today will pretty much bring to an end this stage of things. The postings for all of these 43 new positions actually went up on the intranet yesterday. We've confirmed that those are all up. We've started having some applications come in. Those postings will be open for 2 weeks through till October the 15th. And we're going to just talk through a little bit around what that recruitment application process looks like so that you're all clear on what you'd need to do. Now, I'm aware last time I wasn't particularly too clear on this primary operator thing. Mike, you had a good explanation for the changes that are going to come up with it becoming a full-time post.
Yeah, so any of the full-time staff who've attached themselves to either Kamloops or Kelowna Post for the purposes of call-out will actually lose that designation. As both Kelowna and Kamloops are now full-time posts, there's no call-out Fox or Kilo units, so they won't have that designation. If full-time staff who have lost that designation would like to have a primary operator for call-out, they would have to reapply for one of the neighboring communities that still has a Fox or Kilo card.
Okay.
Those communities.
Thanks. I'll try and remember that for next time. Get it straight. Okay, so in terms of the recruitment process, one of the things that the collective agreement lays out is a certain provision for stations that have less than 8 full-time staff, where we can actually do a mix of local hires versus provincial hires. So we are able to do some local hiring in West Kelowna, Lake Country, and Chase, although the Kamloops and Kelowna posts are going to be all provincial because they already have more than the 8. So we're following the collective agreement with that. So Mike, can I hand over to you just to talk through the process of what people will do to do those applications?
Yeah, sure. So like Nick said, for both Kamloops and Kelowna, we'll be following the current collective agreement for filling of the positions. West Kelowna Station will see 2 local hires and 2 provincial hires. Lake Country will see 1 local hire and 1 provincial hire. whereas Chase will see 2 local hires and 1 provincial. All applicants, including in-post employees, must complete 2 steps to complete their application process for each separate posting that they apply for. The first step is to apply on the posting itself, and the second step is to submit a post-shuffle preference form. This post-shuffle preference form is for each separate posting. You must do a separate form. The form is found on the BCEHS internet, as well as there's a link on the postings to the form. One thing that we've found so far with some of the applicants, we want to make sure that staff, when they use the post-shuffle preference form, that they start a new one for each posting. We're asking that you don't save the form to your desktop and reuse the same form for separate postings. There's been some errors in technology when submitting that process. So how will the recruitment process work? Current full-time staff in each post are assigned a new shift. Vacancies for the remaining number of full-time positions are posted. All staff apply to that posting and bid by seniority using the post-shuffle preference form. In-post staff must submit this form to be considered for a new shift or platoon. This generates an applicant list that is blended by seniority to include in-post and out-of-post employees. For the post-shuffle itself, no incumbent can be bumped through the post-shuffle process. Vacancies on a shift or platoon are based on seniority. Any in-post moves to the new vacancy created remains within that same post-shuffle process.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So from my perspective, the couple of key things here is that anybody who wants to apply for one of the vacancies or even participate in that post-shuffle process, if they already have a shift at that station, needs to go onto the intranet and actually do a fresh application using what you download from that particular posting. Follow the instructions really carefully. Make sure that you get the post-shuffle form in for that particular application, because we don't want to have anybody miss out on an opportunity because they've kind of made a mistake in the application process. We have had some recent examples where that has been the case, where certain staff members have had to be excluded from a recruitment process because they missed one of these steps, and we really don't want that to happen here. So please be diligent, please pay attention, because we wouldn't want that situation to happen again. And as I say, even if you are in the post, if you want to participate in the post shuffle, then please do so. Now, if you are in the post and you already have that position, it's safe. You are allocated that. It's just if you wanted to participate in the shuffle that you have that opportunity. Okay. So between now and kind of November or January, depending on each station, we're now into a little bit of a transition period. And I just want to reassure everybody and make it clear that during this transition period, all of the on-call shifts that are at the station remain. They are still being scheduled in the same way. So any kilo shifts that are there will still receive the kilo guarantee. Any of the Fox shifts will still be scheduled as Fox. The two exceptions to this are that 315 and 341 Fox shifts, where they will be able to submit through their shift activity form for the full 12 hours pay as of October the 1st. So hopefully that process is now up and running, and we'll start seeing some of those things coming through. And again, if there's any questions coming up from staff at the station who are in that situation, then we'll be following up with them. Once we get to the transition, then obviously from those dates, the November the 22nd for Chase and West Kelowna, and then January 17th for Kamloops, and January the 25th for Kelowna. Then those new schedules will come into effect, and you know, I don't think we see any changes to Encore shifts that still exist. So it should be just the regular availability and scheduling as we've done. Okay, it's good. I'm starting to see some questions come through now, so keep those coming. Please, if you've got anything at all, we've got plenty of time here. We've still got about 45 minutes of this session where we can answer some questions. But before we do that, I just wanted to end by saying that we have done the best job I think we've been able to do with our teams in developing resource plans for these areas. Hopefully, they're going to achieve our objectives. We've intended these to be a long-term solution, but we are still open-minded to the fact that, you know, the implementation, the reality may turn out to be slightly different from what we predict. So we will, once these shifts are implemented, just as we've done in other areas, we will be regularly connecting in with Brian, with Mike, with teams in their areas, looking at some of the data just to see and make sure that things are going according to plan, and conducting, you know, monthly reviews, 3 months, 6 months of evaluations, so that we can actually start talking and reassuring ourselves that this has had the positive effect that we hope. So we'll continue to communicate with you, with all staff through our usual channels, our action plan update newsletters. There will be the new communication channels that are just being put into place right now, so that you guys will also get to hear some of those results. And if we need to make tweaks to these plans, then we will do so to make sure that we're being as effective as we can with this. So that's it for the presentation. We're now going to go into questions and answers. As I said earlier, I have a laptop just off camera here, so I'm going to start going through those questions, and then we'll see what comes up and see what we can do. Okay, so I'm just going to start right at the top with the very first question. So I want to apply to more than one post position, but it hasn't been clear to me if one application will negate the others. Good question. Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it does. So when you're applying to the posting in Kamloops, you put in by preference what you want, and as well as your shift or the platoon that you're looking for as well. But you know a little more about that.
And with if you apply for both Kamloops and Kelowna, we set up all the postings to be the same for a specific reason, that we wanted that ability that if we posted, let's say, for example, Kelowna today, but we wait and don't post for a couple months for Kamloops, and someone transfers to Kelowna but actually wants Kamloops, that way we're posting them all together so that the preference is there for you to choose on the posting. So apply for both. If you're unsure if you're going to get either Kamloops or Kelowna, you'll take either or. Apply on both. And then through the selection process and talking with the talent acquisition group, they'll offer you what comes up first, and subsequently, if you make it to the list on the other, then you have that decision on which posting that you would like to take.
Yeah.
I hope that answers it for you.
No, that's exactly it. I was just going to say the same, is that we had deliberately posted all of these positions together to give everybody the visibility of all of them at the same time. I think you have to put in separate applications for each one. So make sure that you do that and that you submit your post-shuffle preference form and your application for each one. But by all means, apply for all or as many as you are interested in taking, because applying for one definitely does not exclude you from the others. Hopefully that's answered that one. Okay, next question. How many IREG staff do you anticipate hiring in the Kelowna area throughout the process?
So at this point, we haven't made a decision on how many or the times of when we're going to hire them. one way that we do look at it is based on the holiday entitlement for the post. So that does change at times based on seniority. Previous postings for Kelowna always saw senior applicants of greater than 10 years seniority, so they would have full holiday entitlement. With this new, significant number of full-time positions, we may see some junior employees coming into the post that may not have the full holiday entitlement, so the need for the extra E-reg may not be there. So right now, it's undetermined how many E-regs that we will hire. But it'll be looking at it as a month-to-month schedule goes along and trying to make sure that we're staffing the cars appropriately.
Right now, I know Nick's team is looking at creating sort of a mock schedule for us so that we can take a look and see, how many shifts are going to be available and what will we need. So once we have the opportunity to look at that mock schedule, we'll be in a better position to see what we think we might need right away and what we can put off until a future time.
Yeah. I mean, I think the message is that both of these posts are large enough that there will be multiple E-reg positions required in the long term. The specific timing around those hires is probably what's most in discussion, and that will really depend on which of who takes these new positions coming in, but also what level of availability is being offered by the Encore staff in those posts. So we don't want to overhire on the E-regs and cause some of the Encore staff to lose access to work, but equally we don't want to be left with ambulances unstaffed. So it's a bit of a balancing act, so we'll be managing it as we go. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, in Nanaimo, that's worked out pretty effectively, and we've been able to review on a month-by-month basis and bring in, and in Nanaimo, they're now up to, I think, 4 E-regs. So, there will be, I would say, at least 4 or 5, if not more, in the future. But exact timing is a bit difficult to predict at this stage. Good question. Thank you. Okay, next question. How many new ambulances have been created, and how many have been reallocated from part-time to full-time?
So in Kamloops, we have 2 new ambulances that have been created and 1 Fox car that's being transitioned into being an Alpha car.
For Kelowna, we've converted the Fox car to a full-time resource, and we'll be adding 2 more additional, I guess it'll be 1 ambulance. Do we consider there's 1 new? So it'll be 1 moving. So Lake Country, one of the Kilo cars, is being moved from the Lake Country station to Kelowna Post and becoming a full-time Charlie car to help meet the demand in Kelowna. And I think that covers the move part.
Yeah. So it's always a little bit difficult to do direct comparison because we're not necessarily doing a direct translation of the same shift type. But in both communities, we do have a mix. But we have been able to add additional resources in both areas, 2 new ambulances in both of those urban centres. In Kelowna, one of them has been through repositioning a vehicle from Lake Country. In Kamloops, it's 2 net new ones. So it's a mix of both, for sure. Okay, next question. And again, good. I've seen some more questions come through. Keep them coming. We've got plenty of time here. So next one, a little bit of a longer question, but I'll read it out in its entirety. For those of us that are currently attached to Kamloops as a part-time call-out station, because we also work in KDOC, we have been told we will no longer be allowed to be attached to these posts. Why, for those of us that are double qualified, are we not allowed to stay in the now full-time post? After 20 years, it's upsetting that we now have to commute outside of our home community.
Yeah, so Kamloops currently has part-time cars, and so full-time members in KDOC can maintain their primary operator for call-out purposes in Kamloops. But as of January 17th, it will be a full-time post, and there are no part-time cars there for call-out. So for that reason, you would have to attach yourself to a station that actually has part-time cars for call-out. So you can, from what I understand, you can still maintain yourself secondary availability in Kamloops, but for call-out purposes, you have to be attached to a station that has call-out cars.
Okay. Yeah, it is one of the impacts of moving to a full-time post. I guess it's quite unique because not every place has its own dispatch center. But yeah, we recognize that may be an impact for you as an individual. But hopefully there will be a way of addressing that.
And similar to Vancouver dispatch employees, with Vancouver Post being so large, you submit availability on your days off as a secondary operator, and there's work out there that you can maintain your skills through that process. But if you want that primary status obligation by attaching yourself to a station, it would have to be one of the outside communities.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. Okay. Next question. The posting in Kelowna is for reg spots. So presumably all of those spots will go to the irregs that are already working in Kelowna.
So no, the reg position is a provincial posting that anybody can apply for with their seniority. Potentially someone applying for the position could be senior to somebody that's E-reg already in Kelowna Post, and that senior person would get the position over somebody that's E-reg currently today in Kelowna Post.
Yeah. And there are 16 positions in Kelowna?
Correct.
And currently you have how many E-regs?
I'm supposed to have 3 E-regs is what I would normally have. We've gone through a number of postings that were filled prior to this change. And currently we're trying to hire 3 E-regs to replace. So currently today there's no E-regs attached to Kelowna Post, but we're currently hiring 3 just to that minimal level.
Right. And the same would apply to Kamloops, where there's 18 new full-time positions, and we currently have 2 E-regs.
Yeah. So those E-regs are able to apply through that provincial process, but they're subject to the seniority as it would be on any other posting. So that's, again, it's another factor that impacts the ability to predict how many E-reg positions we're going to need to hire and when, is what happens to those individuals. Are they successful in bidding for regular positions? Do they want to bid for a regular position? And what will that leave us in terms of gaps for the E-reg staff? So that's definitely not the case that the E-regs will be taking any of those reg positions for sure, and they definitely won't be taking them all because there's a lot more positions than there are E-regs. So, okay, good. Next question. So it's a little bit of a follow-up, I think, on what we were just saying about primary operators. So if full-time employees currently attached to Kamloops for part-time call-out, if we choose not to move to a call-out station, will we be able to pick up NNBO or SNBO as secondaries?
Yeah, so no notice book-offs and short notice book-offs, yes, as a secondary operator. Once the WAG's been followed and the primary staff have been contacted and there's the secondary vacancies, then yes, they'll be available for those.
Good point of clarification from the earlier question. Okay. So do all applicants for Kelowna and Kamloops out of post have to submit a post shuffle preference form?
Yes. And so especially if you're coming in and it doesn't matter what position that you want, you just want a position in Kamloops or in Kelowna Post, on the post shuffle, select each and every one of the boxes for the different shifts and platoons. If you're looking to, if it really doesn't matter to you, you're just looking to get a position.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a simple yes. Please submit the post shuffle form. You know, if you don't have a specific preference, just put down as many as you can. The reason that this is done is that, you know, we're going to have a lot of people, we think, applying for a large number of positions, and we need to very quickly be able to sift through the seniority for each position to start calling out people. and we don't want to be waiting 6 months for these positions to be filled. So being diligent will get you involved in the process and allow us to get through and give everybody certainty around the recruitment process a lot sooner. Okay, so is this a posting for the transfer unit out of Kamloops? So I think, we maybe need to make a bit of a distinction. The Juliet unit that we are going to have in Kamloops to do transfers is not going to be treated the same as a transfer unit is in the Lower Mainland. So the transfer unit in the Lower Mainland, it has its own specific position, right? It's a full-time position. They are generally posted separately. The Juliet car in Kamloops is going to be available for the Encore staff in that post to do that work. And part of the reason that we have set this up as a Juliet is that we need to basically work with Interior Health to show that this concept can work. It's very dependent on Royal Inland Hospital and Kelowna General, particularly the cardiac cath lab, being able to work in partnership with us over a much more fixed schedule and much more like advanced planning around the movement of these types of patients. And that may take some refinement and adjustment over time based on their clinical processes, their booking, scheduling processes, their treatment processes, so that we know and can predict when patients are going to be ready to be picked up and dropped off at the different facilities. So it will give us a little bit of flexibility if we need it to be able to adjust shift times and so on. But we're going to be really dependent on the staff working those shifts to help give us feedback around what is working and their experience of doing that work, so that we can equally consider how that's working for us operationally in partnership with Interior Health. So won't be a separate posting for that. It's just one of the Encore. It's the Encore shift that will be remaining in the post. Anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, and just to add to what Nick said is, transfers are quite an issue in the interior, across the province really, but we are looking at it as its own entity, and that's why we've kept a Juliet car, just to enable us to make some corrections along the way where needed, and to prove the concept that it can work.
That's right. And we're very keen that once we have proved the concept that we can move to create regular positions to do this work. That's very much why we're doing this and why we're treating it this way. We just need to take a bit of time before we can get to that, so that we can be really clear what it is that we need to do and how that's going to work effectively. Okay, next question. Will all scheduling now be done through Provincial scheduling?
So right now for both Kelowna and Kamloops, the Provincial scheduling office takes care of all our scheduling. So the answer is yes.
And then except for the outside areas, so West Kelowna, for example, even though they're moving to a full Alpha car, there'll still be in-house scheduling for both Lake Country and West Kelowna this time. They won't be moving to Provincial scheduling. And
the same would be the case for Chase, right?
That's correct, yeah. It's not currently with Provincial scheduling, it'll still be locally scheduled.
Yeah. So, no change then?
No change.
No change to the way we're going to be scheduling the stations as part of this, so that's good. Okay, next question. When can we expect the rollout for the North Okanagan? That's a very good question. That's for me. It's yours. So far, we have defined the phase 2, which was these Kamloops, Kelowna changes, and the Fraser Valley study, which has just kicked off. We were kind of running a lot of these in parallel with the 5 different areas in phase 1 all going through implementation. Now that phase 1 implementation has just finished last week, we're now starting to think about phase 3 and where we will be going next. So we're going to have to do a little bit of discussion with operations to find out where the areas for priority are. but hopefully it won't be too long until we'll be able to announce where we go next. You know, as I've said, the real objective of this is that it's a provincial review, so we will get everywhere, hopefully, but we have to look at the different priorities and work our way around the 180 plus stations we have in the province. I think, I don't know, we're probably up somewhere close to 50 or 60 that we've reviewed already. So maybe we're about a third of the way there. It's good. We're making progress, but it is something that we want to take the time to get right. And if nothing else, this process has shown me the importance of having that local engagement in each of these changes and really looking to understand the impacts before we move to implement something. So we have committed that we are not going to just make changes without going through this same kind of process in each area. So don't have a particular date yet, but hopefully, you know, we've managed to get around a third of the province within the first year. So hopefully it will be within the next year, 2 years, we'll have been able to complete the whole province. Okay, next question. Are stations 39 and 43 included in the Kelowna Post, or is each town its own post?
Yeah, so for both Station 339 in West Kelowna and Station 343 in Lake Country are their own standalone stations, whereas Kelowna Post is stations 340 and 341.
Yeah, we did look at whether or not we would need to or benefit from a change to the post structure in the area. And at this point, the recommendation was not to change the post structure. So that's what we're going forward with. So yeah, the 39 and 43 won't be included in the Kelowna Post.
It's also how we see the local hires for both those stations are because they're not part of the bigger post. They're standalone stations.
Yeah, that's right. That's a key factor that we actually considered, was we wanted to maintain the opportunity for local staff where we could. So that was a good way of doing that. Okay, moving on. Are you looking at the possibility of a transfer fleet for Kelowna Kamloops to keep the emergency fleet in their respective cities? So I'll take this one. I would say yes and no. Definitely transfer work needs to be handled differently to the current state. But what we have recognized is that there is a very big difference between a red transfer that happens within one community to a scheduled long-distance transfer that can take a unit out of their area for hours. So what we want to do first and foremost is to address that issue of crews being taken out of their area for long periods of time for relatively stable patients where that work is predictable. And that's what we are looking to introduce through this Kamloops unit, and we are working with Interior Health to extend that same concept for the rest of the interior. That does not mean that the rest of the fleet will not be doing transfers. They will be doing transfers, but they will hopefully not be doing as many of those long ground transfers as they have been historically.
I think the one thing to remember too is you would hate to limit a resource and put them in a box saying, well, they only do transfers.
Yeah.
One nice thing is that while this unit is doing a transfer, they can also be used for emerge work where needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So it's definitely a balancing act. We recognize that what we've been doing in the past hasn't been the best. There is this kind of, I'll call it low-hanging fruit, where we know this is the biggest impact on our emergency coverage, and we want to make sure that that is as much as possible taken away from the units that are trying to provide that emergency coverage. But it's not about separating the two streams of work and creating a dedicated transfer fleet to suck up all of the transfer work. Another very good question. Okay, is BCAHS looking at true casual positions designated as 0.5 or 0.75 of full-time in the future?
Yeah, so I think what they're referring to is the regular part-time work.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a question that's come up with some frequency, and admittedly at the start of this process I was looking at regular part-time as being beneficial as well. But what we see is in areas like Vancouver, where you have spikes in volume at predictable points in the day or the week, that's where regular part-time work really helps out. Currently in Kamloops and Kelowna, we see a very static call volume across the board, 7 days a week. So bringing on a regular part-time car is not necessary because we see that the volumes don't really peak and valley. So at this point, regular part-time doesn't seem like the proper resource for these communities, and where we can create full-time work, we want to create full-time work.
Yeah, that's right. And not only do we want to, it's also a feature of our collective agreement is that we are committed to create full-time work where it is appropriate. So as Brian has said, we didn't see a case for regular part-time through these particular studies, but that is something that, in particular, I'm interested in seeing how the evaluation goes, and whether there would be a future case to introduce some level of regular part-time into these communities. We see it at the moment as being a feature of the demand in larger urban centres, so we might start seeing it over time here. But it's not something that we're implementing right now. Okay. Follow up from something you said earlier, Mike. So is there another posting for the 3 eRegs you are trying to hire for Kelowna, or are you going off the last eReg posting?
Yeah, so it's subsequent vacancies. All 3 eReg staff have accepted reg spots. One of them, who was from the current posting that was out, is one of those employees. So we're currently phoning, I believe talent acquisition started last Thursday, calling for filling the 3 current vacancies off this last posting.
Yeah, so we are using the last eReg posting. There hasn't been a new one.
No.
Okay. All right, hopefully that's clarified that one. We're getting towards the end here. We've still got plenty of time, so if there's any more questions, then please get them through. So if you have to use secondary employees in either Kelowna or Kamloops for shifts, does that not imply that you will need to hire more part-time employees?
I guess it depends on the situation. Would that mean that we need to start looking at a full complement of eRegs at some point? That might be the answer. If we had a full complement of eRegs and we're still seeing this, then sure, that might be a case for hiring more on-call staff.
I mean, in my mind, at least, there's always a big difference between the kind of the planned vacancies that come up from vacation and all that kind of stuff versus that short notice book off kind of thing. And we just need to make sure we've got the right mix of resources to be able to cover both those scenarios, I think.
Currently for Kamloops and Kelowna, we don't have any current plans to hire more part-time staff, but like as Brian said there, if we do see that we're not able to staff the resources and we have the full-time eReg staff in place, that there is a potential that we may need to hire more on-call staff in the future.
Okay. I'm going to come to the last question now, so if anybody else has anything else they want to ask, then please get it through within the next couple of minutes. We've got the time to address it. If not, then we'll kind of wind up this session, but let's get to this last question. Are any changes coming for South Okanagan, Penticton, etc.? So I guess this is pretty much what we covered off earlier. We are looking at developing the priorities for the phase 3 of this project, still to be determined with operations, but hopefully we'll be able to announce something there. One of the things I will add, because it's relevant to both the North Okanagan and the South Okanagan question, is that we do know that both of those areas also have a high volume of transfers of patients coming into and out of Kelowna. So that is definitely in the scope of my conversations with Interior Health around how we may be able to change things there. So that may not be, a full phase 3 resource planning activity as we've done here, but we might be looking to come and have some local discussions around how we may be able to do some of the transfer work differently, just to support that work with Interior Health and help lay the foundations for a future resource planning activity in those areas. We definitely see it's just shocked me when you see the volume of patients coming down from Vernon Jubilee, coming up from Penticton, as well as the ones we know from Kamloops to Kelowna. There's a lot of patients being moved around. You guys are doing a fantastic job of getting patients to the right level of care that they need, working in partnership with Interior Health, and we just want to continue to grow that, working with them.
Sure.
So I'm not seeing any other questions come through yet. Again, another couple of minutes, and we'll see if there's anything else comes through. We'll pick that up. But Brian, any final thoughts, parting comments?
There's a few entities to thank. We want to thank the union, of course. They worked really well with us, gave us some tremendous input. We'd also like to thank our unit chiefs for being very involved in this process. And it's been great seeing them come out and great getting all of their ideas. But also to your team, Nick. I mean, I think I've only seen a very small portion of what goes on behind the scenes with your group, and it's a tremendous amount of work. And so I just want to acknowledge it and thank you for you and your team and for what they've done.
Thank you, Brian. Mike, anything from you?
I just think I just want to recognize the impacts to our staff. We're announcing a huge amount of positions all at once, lots of moving pieces, lots of changes happening. There'll be some significant impacts to our current facilities and stations that we have. We're adding more resources to stations that maybe were already at max or over capacity, and now we're adding even more. So the deployment team, as well as the managers for the areas, are working with facilities to try to help mitigate some of these impacts. But it's great to see that we have this huge step forward and this number of resources all at once, but it comes with some challenges that for the staff, we're going to have to ask for some patience and support through this process to obviously be able to provide better care to our patients.
Thank you. It's excellent. I've been really, really impressed by the focus of everybody on trying to really improve the service that we provide our communities. That's shown up really strong from everybody, from in the working groups, and I think through the station meetings as well that we've had. This is not easy work, for sure. It's not easy to understand what our communities need. It's not easy to figure out how we change from a system that we've all been accustomed to. We've kind of grown up with, things have been the same way for a long time. How do we transition together into something that's more effective and that respects everybody through that change process? We've really tried our best to do that, and that's been really exemplified by the work of Brian and Mike in leading their teams to get us to this place. So, as we've said, we're still very open to continue to learn. This is not, one and done, I call it. It's not that this is it and, we'll be like this for another 20 years. One of the things that I'm very committed to do is that beyond this project and the first time around the province is that we establish as an organization a regular mechanism for reviewing the level of resources we have and working with frontline leaders and frontline paramedics to understand what changes are continue to be required to keep up with that changing demand and the changing nature of our communities. So that's where I'm at with this, and I think it's, as always, I just love being part of this process. It's what keeps me coming to work every day, that's for sure. Now we've had a couple of other questions pop in, so we'll just clear those up before we finish. So when we fill out a post-shuffle form, do we have to specify all the platoons or just the shift patterns?
Yeah, so it's specify it completely. So yes, if you, doesn't matter what platoon, what shift pattern, so make sure you select the shift pattern you want, and if you're okay with any platoon, select all 4 ABCD platoons on the shift form. So I guess the more is better. So fill out the form completely. Don't leave things out, assuming someone will know what you mean by that.
Okay. And we've got a good one to finish off here. It's a little bit outside of the scope because we've been talking about BLS resources, but are there plans to introduce ACP PRUs in either area?
Good. So obviously in this deployment plan, we focused on the BLS resources only. We did not look at the ACP resources in Kelowna or Kamloops, focusing on that foundation that Nick had alluded to earlier, that we're building the foundation, but definitely looking at different ways of deploying the ACP resources is on the table, and those are some further discussions to look at in the future and discuss with the union as well.
Yeah, definitely where we want to go. As I've said, this work expands. It's most definitely not over. We need to consider all of those other resources that we have in our system, not just the BLS resources. And we also need to consider how we're going to work with our dispatch centers to make sure that resources are being used as effectively as possible. So for both of these plans, a lot of that work is now starting to help get us ready for the January kind of timeline for the 2 big centers. So we have, as part of this implementation, long-standing working groups with all of the different support areas across our organization, fleet, facilities, HR, IT, and everybody. And they're all lined up to help us deliver this plan. And so we are going to make sure that we're ready for those dates that we've announced, as we have been for all of the phase 1 communities that we have done. So I'm just going to finish off by saying, you may have had some questions that have come up or may come up in the coming days, weeks, or months. Please feel free to submit those questions by email to the Action Plan Ideas inbox. We do follow up on all of those with the individuals. And as I said, a copy of this webinar, fortunately you won't have to look at our faces, but you will get a copy of the slides and the audio that you can reference. You can share that around. You can have direct other people to it if they're interested and weren't able to make today's session. So I'd just like to finish off by saying thank you to Brian and Mike. It's been a fantastic process. Really, really pleased to be able to make these announcements. And I guess, yeah, we'll call it a day there. Sounds good. Looks like we've covered off all the questions.